My guest at this time is Andy Berger. She is the co-founder of Beulah's Place, which is an organization in Redmond, Oregon, that helps homeless teens stay away from sexual predators. In conjunction with National Child Abuse Prevention Month, we wanted to get some insights on Andy's own personal story in this area, as well as the work that she's doing at Beulah's Place, and what Americans just need to know in general about the scope of this problem and what they can do in their own communities to help stop it. And Andy, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, child abuse takes many forms, as we know. It could be a physical assault on a regular basis or even intermittently to sexual abuse and even trafficking, which is unfortunately what your story is like, which we'll get to in a moment. But what's the most urgent thing for folks to think about if they're even aware that this is National Child Abuse Prevention Month?
Well, one of the things, Greg, is that every single day in America, 5 children die from child abuse. And as you said, it can be physical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, mental, all of that. But definitely we're talking here about the physical. And that is just a tragedy that should not exist in this country. But besides that, we want to make sure that people understand the scope of what can or can't be done. But where there's an adult involved with a child, that child should always be protected. And if somebody sees something, they really do need to say something.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because people, they might think something looks weird, but they don't know. I don't know these people. That girl looks like she's not really thrilled to be with that adult or that boy.
Right.
But it could just be that they had an argument in the car on the way to the store. If I get involved, it's going to be a whole big thing, and most likely I'm just imagining it. What do you say to those people?
Well, there are a lot of folks like that, understandably. What I usually talk to other people about is, first of all, find out from your local law enforcement office, what are the parameters. If you have a gut feeling that something is wrong, maybe the child isn't dressed well, or they have no eye contact, or they look like they're being managed or controlled in some way. Even if you've had a fight with a family member, there's usually some kind of familial I don't know what to say, but some kind of familial emotion going on. But for the other part of it, if you know what you can do, there's nothing wrong with calling the non-emergency line saying, look, I just witnessed something, not really sure if it's a big deal or not, but it's better to check into it than not to. Oftentimes, people's instincts are pretty spot on, and with all of the kids that are being abducted today, with all of the transient families and dysfunctional families where a lot of kids are left to their own devices, walking long distances, to go to friends or parties, you just don't really know. I say err on the side of safety for that child's sake.
Another answer you might get, I would think, is, well, that's not really an issue in my community. That's for big cities or high crime areas or something like that. How prevalent is this really coast to coast?
Well, coast to coast, it happens in every single state, whether we want to believe it or not, and not believing doesn't mean it's not true. It's a $32 billion industry, human trafficking is, the majority of which comes from sex trafficking. And in a small town like ours and 30,000 people, we have a little bit of that issue now. It's coming from a larger city, but we still have an issue, and we're jumping on it. We want to make sure we're a community that says not here, no way. We protect our children. So a lot of times denial is what keeps this issue from getting the attention that it needs. And I can speak to that directly because I went through that. But the kids I've rescued can also speak to that because nobody wanted to get involved, or they were people of influence and they had people covering them.
Let's clear up one more myth before we get to your story and perhaps a story from one of the folks that you've helped there at Beulah's Place. One of the things I think that folks commonly believe is that if people are sex trafficked, they're snatched from a mall somewhere and they're in the custody of someone they don't know, they've never met before. Is that usually the case, sometimes the case, or is that a gross misperception?
I would go with the latter, the gross misperception, because one of the recent cases I was involved with here in Central Oregon involved a teenager at a high school during an athletics program. And so while there may be abductions and traffickers pursuing the mall, kids, it's not really what I would call normal. None of the kids that we have rescued had that experience. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But basically, any child alone or even with another child, whether they're younger, a lot of times we'll see little kids walking together maybe to the 7-Eleven or to the park, or the older teens who are more independent, they are vulnerable like any other child. So basically, it's not just the malls, it's the churches, it's the schools, it's the athletics. We've had national stories even from universities on this issue. And so it's rampant. We cannot have an industry that large without it being allowed.
And so people they know and think they can trust
yes,
could be involved, which you don't want to make folks paranoid, but you do want to make them vigilant. So how do you do that?
One of the things is if you are a parent or a guardian or an aunt or an uncle, you need to be very aware of the whereabouts. And while a lot of kids will complain and say, oh, mom or oh, dad, you need to know who their friends are and who the parents of their friends are. If you're sending your child to music lessons, do you know the background of the teacher and or their spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever it is? Need to be a little bit more diligent. One of the stories that I can share is that there was a mother who chose her boyfriend over her 15-year-old daughter. Boyfriend didn't like the daughter, threw the daughter out, all her things on the lawn, and told her to go figure life out herself. 15 years old. And she's a prime vulnerable product, as predators would say, for their trafficking system. It's a big business, and they'll take their product anywhere they can get it, especially if they think there is a youth that is unaccompanied, not being watched. They go to parties. It's an after-school thing. Predators actually pay young people to target other people on college campuses, other kids, in order to get them into a trafficking ring.
We're talking with Andy Berger. She's the co-founder of Beulah's Place. And Andy, in reading your biography, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Your entire childhood you were abused in this way. Tell our listeners a little bit about it, if you're comfortable doing so.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important for people to know that it does happen. And there wasn't a term called trafficking back then, but essentially I was trafficked by immediate family members, extended family members, from ages 6 months to 17 years old. And my birth mother made it clear my days were numbered. She was the primary sexual predator. And while no money was exchanged, in my opinion, when an adult not only harms a child, but also transports a minor to another family member where they know what's going to happen, that is also trafficking, in my opinion. Just because money doesn't change hands, that's a whole other sector of victims that will probably never come forward or never be fully addressed, because the traditional term involves commercial trafficking. But in my case, I was 5 the first time I tried to take my life, because the physical abuse, the sexual torture, other things that happened were so intense. I thought being dead would be better than continuing to live where I was. And if somebody was going to kill me anyways, I wanted to beat them to the punch. Now, in my life, God interceded. In other people's lives, it might be something else. But the last time my birth mother tried to take my life by choking me almost to death, I was 17 years old. So I understand a lot of what these kids go through, even though I was not homeless.
Andy, go back to what you said there, that God intervened. Explain what happened. Yes,
I went down to the curb of our house at that time, hoping that I could just jump in front of a car that would be coming. And it was a fairly busy street normally, except this particular day. And so I just couldn't take it anymore, and I thought I'll just kill myself and be done with it, and then I win. And while I was waiting for a car to be coming fast enough to jump in front of, I looked up into the sky, and I just saw this huge blue sky, and I thought, somebody must be greater out there, somebody who made the sky. I wonder how far it goes. And that's kind of where God met me, in terms of I just believed that there had to be somebody bigger than the people hurting me, bigger than the shame and the ugliness I felt about myself, even at that young age. And so after a while, realizing that there was no car and that maybe there was something bigger and better out there, I went back up to the garage, and I remember literally saying, if you keep me alive, I will do whatever you call me to do. not fully understanding, of course, at 5 what that might mean. It was a very hard childhood and teenagehood. But the last time I considered suicide, I was 16, and I thought, you can't be on the fence. You have to choose. You either live and live fully, or you don't. And I just decided that, over time, God and I would figure it out together, and we did.
Talk about how that led to the work you do now. I have to imagine that was quite a process for you, not only escaping eventually that horrific experience in childhood, but then wanting to get back into the lives of people who were going through the same thing. Maybe that was the great motivator. Explain how that happened.
Yes, my primal thought was, if I live, I win. If I don't, they win. But I also want to help other kids that don't have a chance, because all through that, I still felt blessed that I had a chance. I know it sounds crazy, but that's just how it was. So after I graduated college and graduated law school and decided I did not want to be a lawyer, I wanted to do something more hands-on, over years of successful business, I met my husband, and we decided that we needed to do something for the youth in our area that were on the street, that were judged by the way they looked, whether they had too many tattoos or they were smoking or whatever it was. And we created Beulah's Place in 2008. And the reason we did that is because I was in my 30s, Greg, before I really got the help I needed with counseling and really learning how to communicate and how to take care of myself, but also just how to deal with all the ugliness and the identities and things that had happened. Because when you think about it, as a child, you expect the people who raise you to love you, or you would think that they should. And when they don't, there's that underlying thought that there must be something wrong with me.
You had to learn what normal was. I mean, given that horrific,
I did.
Yeah.
And normal, it's different for everybody. But yes, I did. I would ask people, okay, so I don't really understand this situation. What's the normal response? I literally would do that. And then over time, I just grew more confidence. I got healthier. I became much more bold. And so when we started Beulah's Place, our goal was to reach the 18 to 20-year-olds, because at 18, services usually stop, and they're either going to replicate where they came from, which is not good, or they'll stay lost in society, also not good. Or if there's an intercessor of sorts like us, perhaps we can help them get on a better path a lot sooner. I didn't want them to wait till they were in their 30s to get help like I did. And so we started taking our first teens in to safe houses, and we've been an all-volunteer army, really, for 10 years. And we have rescued over 37 adult teens through the Safe House system. And we also help minors. We just can't house them at this point. But we get them jobs. We make sure they finish high school. We give them food, clothing, medical, dental, whatever we can, all based on community support. And when your listeners visit BeulahsPlace.org, our website, they'll see a lot of information there about that. But these are the kids that have been discarded, abandoned, severely abused, trafficked, or led into criminally predatory activities because they thought the streets would be safer than where they were.
I'm sure that all of these 37 stories could be shared in some way that would still protect their privacy and so forth. But is there one that immediately comes to mind when somebody says, tell me about how Beulah's Place has changed a life, that you say, oh, let me tell you about this one?
Oh, absolutely. We have a number of those. But one such story, the young girl, we'll call her Allison, she was violated by her father, who had a leadership position in the community, and the mother divorced him, became an alcoholic, started dating another man who didn't like children, and basically left Allison alone from ages 12 to 16 with frozen food in the freezer like 6 days a week. And she would just come back to check in once in a while. And what does a kid do in that age bracket after not getting attention, not having parental intervention or any kind of parenting at all? They find friends that do things like drugs or other ways to medicate the pain they're in. But Allison managed to keep a great GPA with high school. She ended up getting into drugs but rehabbed a couple of times. And when we got her, The only way she got attention from her mother was when she attempted suicide. So she was on her third suicide attempt when we got her, when she called in the hotline. And we took her right away, found her a safe place. And today, several years later, even though she graduated our program a few years ago, she is a career lady. She bought her own new car. She gives back, constantly shows up to promote not only our program, but to help any other teen that is in trouble. And so that is one of our stories. And the other one I'd like to share is about Nev. And Nev was very ill when we found her. I didn't know if she was going to live long enough for us to help, but she did, and she just became a two-time Dean for a student and has been accepted to a major university and wants to go into pre-law so she can help other people.
Andy, we're just about out of time. Want to get the big picture and the closer picture to home in our last minute or two here. Obviously, this is a huge problem across the country, really around the world, but it's also one that affects just about every community. So how well are our national leaders addressing this? I know there's been some legislation recently. And most importantly, perhaps, what can folks do in their own community?
In this administration, we have made more progress than I have seen in 20-plus years, and I hope that we continue to do it. We have got to protect the victims and the citizens right here and get them the help that they need. And as far as what can people do in their own communities, find the community centers that help with homeless teens, get involved with youth in some way. If they don't know how to do that, start a 501c3 or start an organization that specifically addresses at-risk homeless teens and give them that opportunity to come to someplace safe where they can talk to someone without being judged, on appearance or background or culture or any of that. The other way is to hook up with an organization that already does what Beulah's Place is doing and donate time, donate resources. We need resources all the time. We can't operate without community support. And our website has ways for people to do that at beulasplace.org. But again, get involved. Don't just watch the news or say, well, that doesn't happen here, because I guarantee it does. It's in every state. And when we do have traffickers that get arrested or that get prosecuted, we need to make sure they serve the maximum penalty with no parole, no options, done deal, so that at least that one person is off the street, so to speak, and cannot hurt any more victims, because you cannot return someone's innocence to them.
On that sobering note, we'll call time. Andy, we applaud as much as we can with words the work you're doing, particularly after everything you've been through. And I know that motivates your efforts to make sure that those who need the help get it as soon as possible. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And once again, we want to let folks know about beulasplace.org to learn more about specifically what you're doing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Andy Berger is co-founder of Beulah's Place. Again, beulasplace.org. This is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.